Hello. I just finished a book. My first read with my eyeballs book of June, and I thought I would talk to you about it. It is a new release. I think it just came out last month. Yes, I think it just came out last month. So My Darling Dreadful Thing by Johanna Van Veen. I was really excited for this one. It's one I put in a request for an ARC, and I didn't get it. And then I got an email when the book came out and was like, hey, we gave you that ARC. You should totally review us on Amazon. I was like, I didn't get that ARC. My ARC is still pending. So I went and put a hold on it from my library because I had also told Libby to notify me when my library got it. And so I got it while I was in the middle of the readathon last month, and I just finished it today. I don't have the book to show you because I returned it back to Libby early because there were 6 people waiting for it. New release. So we're just going to talk about it quick. I'm going to do like a non-spoilery, and then I'm going to do a couple spoilery things because I have some opinions on this that I wasn't really like fond of, and I think they're worth talking about. So we're going to do 2 parts. So first is the non-spoilers. This was a 3. This was a 3-star because it was just fine. I was actually really bored through a lot of this, and I love slow books that focus on characterization and low plot, mostly character-driven stories. I really love those, but this one just didn't do it well, I think, for me. It was fine. It just wasn't, yes, this is what I need while I was reading it. I was bored. So, let me give you the summary first, and I don't know if this is going to spoil. I'm going to give you the summary. Basically, we have Roosja. So we are set, let's start with the setting. We're set in the Netherlands in the 1950s, 1951, I believe, in the Netherlands. And so people have names that fit that location. So we get told in the book, and actually near the end, that Roosja is Dutch for Rose. So her name is Rose. She is in her 20s. She's 21. But we're flashing back in the beginning to when she's a small child. And her mama, the woman who is her guardian, does seances, and she makes Roos, she goes by Roos, go under the floorboards and pull strings so that it looks like spirits are like knocking things over. And because she's a very small girl, she can fit under the floorboards, but she's terrified of it because she's pretty sure there's a corpse down there with her. And at one point she gives this corpse her blood because she has this like anxiety habit of chewing this here and making it bleed. She gives the corpse that she sees her blood and calls her Ruth, and that ties that spirit to her. The cool thing is that that spirit is a bog body, which is kind of cool to have like that kind of like use in there, where we talk about why bodies might have gone into a bog and how they decompose in a bog and all that type of stuff. So that part is really interesting and I think unique and something I haven't seen, and also the use of the spirits. So Ruth is her protector and also gets exploited. She gets exploited for having this spirit that she can see and that can possess her for the seances. So her mama uses it as her spirit guide type of trick. What does she call her? Her companion spirit, her spirit companion, who is meant to guide her. That's the words that I was trying to put together. Who's meant to guide her through the seance. So, but then she's not able to call these other spirits, but she's able to pretend because she invites Ruth to possess her, and that allows her to pretend much more shamelessly. And during one of these seances, this wealthy woman comes and she offers to essentially buy Roos from her mama so that she can have her as her companion. And after this woman buys her, we discover that this woman also has her own spirit companion. And then in the middle of the book, in the beginning, in the middle of all this story, we are getting chapters that have interviews of a doctor interviewing Roos about something that happened, and she's being blamed for a murder. So and the doctor is trying to figure out if she is mentally unwell or if she's a really good actress, is essentially what he's trying to figure out. So is she guilty, or is she innocent due to not being fit for trial, like, essentially. So that is basically the synopsis of what happens. The beginning of the book, the author does a really good job of giving us a very long list of content warnings, and I should have highlighted them so I could pull them up, but she actually lists every like content warning. So I'm going to give you the ones that I remember that are like big ones. So content warnings: incest, racism, homophobia. We have mental illness talked about in a way that is not how we would discuss it today, that could be a little bit harmful types of beliefs around mental illness, particularly schizophrenia. We have a child abuse. We have a toxic relationship between a mother and a daughter. We have a toxic relationship, I believe, between, which is what I'm going to get into, between a woman and another woman 15 years her senior with a imbalanced power dynamic. We have another toxic relationship between a woman and her sister-in-law that, again, involves a bit of a power dynamic imbalance. We have blood, lots of mentions of cannibalism. We have mentions of an essay that is not directly really described using explicit language, but there is a scene that's a couple pages long, which then results in a violent attack involving blood and cannibalism, like minor cannibalism. We have death, murder, desecration of a corpse. We have gore, and those are the big ones. So a lot. It is a gothic horror. It is a horror novel. It is a gothic horror novel. So my little review, because we do know from the book is pitched as sapphic. There is a romance between Roos and the woman who buys her, Agnes, and this is like the issue that I have an issue with this, because Roos's mother kept her very thin and weak and childlike, and she said that it was so that they could exploit the men who came to the seances because they would want to be around her because of innocence and things like that. So not only is Roos has been starved. Oh, there we go. There's another content warning. Is we have some issues around food where we talk a lot about restriction of food, and then the results of that with like food hoarding and things like that that come after it. So there is some discussions of that as well, and very clear PTSD responses. Very clear PTSD responses. So anyway, going back to Roos and Agnes. So the relationship is a 15-year age difference, and Roos has been kept so immature and childlike that it's almost does the Born Sexy Yesterday thing, which if you have not heard what that is, I really recommend the Pop Culture Detective video. That is where I learned about this phrase a few years back, and the examples that he gives are really, really good. I also just recommend those videos in general. They have some really good ones up there. If you're interested in tropes in media. Really interesting. Lots of discussions of the patriarchy and toxic masculinity from actually a male perspective, which is kind of cool. Anyway, moving back on. So it's almost that trope where she's very immature to a lot of the ways of the world, but seems to know lots of things about sex and sexuality, which is a bit uncomfortable considering the one other experience that we are aware of her having was an SA. So that kind of, I think it can be, I mean, it is a horror novel, I get it, but I also think the author says after all of her like content warnings and stuff, she says, this is a gothic horror novel, you know, you expect things to be dark and gritty and not nice, but also at its core, this is a story about love. And so I don't like the love story in this. I need to shift. Okay, that's a little better. I don't like the love story in this. I think because of the power imbalance through the experience level and then the age difference, as well as the fact that Agnes is Roos's employer, and Roos repeatedly says that she wants to do anything to make Agnes happy, anything to make her happy. That is where her love for this woman comes from, the fact that this woman saved her from a situation where she was terrified all the time. She was starved, she was abused verbally and in some cases physically. She was exploited, she was treated as an object rather than a person. And then Agnes saved her from this situation, and Roos is suddenly like, I'm in love with this woman. And it's not healthy. It's not, whether it's love or not, it is not healthy. So I didn't believe the love in it, because it was more that she was bonded to this woman for out of gratefulness to her. They had a lot of things in common, which was really good for Roos, but I would have preferred her to just have had a friend rather than this whole sexual relationship. I think it kind of gave me a bit of the ick, given the power imbalance, because then, like I said, it's her employer, it's someone that she wants to please, and then you have on top of this the PTSD. So the other thing I didn't really like about this is that Roos, as her character, what she's experienced, she has a lot of every time someone has a negative emotion, she's worried that it's her fault and what can she do to fix it, because she doesn't want to be abandoned. And while that feels very valid, and aligns with, I can't get my angle right on my camera, aligns with some of the feelings that I've personally had to deal with in therapy, it makes sense. But reading it from a character constantly, as many times as we did, because it's very repetitive with those themes, makes it really hard to like that character, because she doesn't grow, really. There's no growth around it, because we don't see it. Time happens, we're with her for like 6 months or something like that, and there isn't a lot of growth around that aspect of it, and it makes it very difficult to sympathize for her when it's like, girl, get your shit together. Like, I understand in reality that it doesn't happen that fast, but this is a book, and in a book I really want some character growth on page. And I don't want it to just be like, oh, well, this woman rescued her, so she's in love with her, and now everything's fine. She's just going to keep having those emotions. Like, I want something more. Like, it was so frustrating having her constantly on edge, like walking on eggshells, worried she was going to upset someone. And then also, Agnes just kind of leaving all the time randomly, which, okay, yeah, but no, like, it was so weird in that aspect. So as much time as we spent hearing how Roos loved and cared for Agnes, we actually didn't spend a lot of time with Agnes, and Agnes actually felt very two-dimensional. We learned about her past, but we never really saw her in the present interacting with Roos unless she was, like, feeding her or, like, talking about their spirit companions. That was really, like, their whole development. Mostly she was, like, feeding her, actually, which was okay. We got more interactions, I think, between Wilhelmina, who is the sister-in-law, than we did with Agnes. Like, as far as them actually having conversations that were, like, not just the two of them trauma bonding. Really, like, some of the other, like, important conversations we got were really just them trauma bonding. We got Agnes talking about all the traumatic things she experienced due to her being half, where is she from? She's from Java. She's from Java. Her mother is from Java. And so her being of a different race, what she experienced growing up that way, because this would have been, like, pre-World War I, because she's, like, 30... I think she's like 36 or something like that. And so what she would have experienced, and so she like just dumps all her trauma, and then Roos dumps all her trauma, and then we just kind of get this continuation of them just, like, dumping their trauma, and that's really, like, the bond that they make. And so believing it as a love story, like an actual love story, the way that the author is wanting to present it, is not necessarily something that worked for me, when it feels more like a toxic relationship, because neither of these people are working on any of their issues. They're just feeding into each other constantly. So yeah, there was that. I did like the descriptions of the manner and the kind of relation. I liked some of the relationship between Ruth and Roos. I did not like their names were so close together. Some of the descriptions of like the creepy things happening, I just feel like the plot was not really there. There was a lot of focus on like the types of clothes people were wearing, the types of food they were eating, and then there was like these like plaster religious statues, these plaster saints that were used a lot, and I think not enough was done with them. Like it was like just not enough was done with the creepy religious elements for them to really be continuing to be pressed into the story. They just weren't really done in a way. There was no... When I read a gothic horror, I really want that sense of like pressure, that constant tension, and there really wasn't that until like the 230 page mark. This was like a 340 something page book before all the extra pages that were in the end. It's like a 340 page book, and nothing really happened until like page 230. It was just... And then even then, when something started happening, it was just like a slow slog. Like something happened and we were like just waiting for the other shoe to drop, but not with that tension. Like it was just like, because it was told so rushed. And I think some of that comes from the aspect of the fact that it is an interview. So we're getting Roos telling the story to the doctor. So it is very tell-y and not very showy, just based on the format that was used. So there's that. I do have a couple spoilers I want to talk about. So this is kind of where the, like, spoiler-free-ish ends. And I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about spoilers. So, that incest trigger warning. Okay, so let's talk about it. There is nothing ever explicitly described. So that is good. We just know that it happened. I guess it's not obvious, but it was... Agnes's husband, Thomas, who has recently passed away. I guess I should have said that she's a new widow. Her husband passed away, and we find out, it's really easy to figure it out, but we find out that he was being wildly inappropriate with his sister, and his sister is madly in love with him because she wanted to keep their bloodline pure and birth the heir. So, therefore... When his sister got pregnant and then the baby died, he decided he wanted to leave his wife, so that because his wife was infertile, Agnes was infertile, so he wanted to be able to have an heir, so he was going to divorce her. Which I'm like, we could have done that without the incest. We didn't need the incest. We already had Wilhelmina being incredibly racist and xenophobic towards Agnes. We didn't need to add in the incest level of it. It just felt gratuitous, because there's a point with horror novels, and especially gothic horror, like newer type of gothic horror, I think, where there's a level, and it's that thing where every time you make something, like, not to paraphrase a horrible person, but take something off before you go out the door. Like, don't, like, she threw all of this stuff in, and then she needed to take something out because it was just gratuitous over the top. We already had the fact that Thomas was a shitty person, Wilhelmina was a shitty person, they had a horrible relationship. They could have just had a, like, close sibling bond, and Wilhelmina was wildly racist, and then the fact that Agnes was infertile would have been a whole reason. We didn't need to add in this weird incest thing that was honestly not worth it for having. Like, there's enough ick in here already. We didn't need another ick. And I more, rather than being like bothered by it, like more like horror, right? I want to feel horrified. I just rolled my fucking eyes at it because I was like, really? Really? It just feels so, maybe it's because we're in the post Game of Thrones era, but it just feels so done for shock value that I'm like, stop doing it for shock value. There was no point. You could have done it without it. So yeah, that really bothered me. I don't remember what it is that I wanted to mention the other part of it, because that was like the big thing that really put me off, because I was just like, it was honestly just a, really? That's what you're gonna do? You had all the options and that's what you did. So I also, I kind of am debating lowering this to a 2.5 because I just so frustrated when this had so much potential. And it could have been really good, and it was just a flop, I think. I apparently am in the minority of opinions when I scroll through the Storygraph reviews. Storygraph has this at about a 4, and with quite a few reviews, and I am mostly in the minority. A lot of people are calling this a really beautiful, like, sapphic gothic horror. Um, I was just really put off by a lot of things. So, yeah, including like power imbalances, age gaps, and the Born Sexy yesterday, and the incest. It was unnecessary. So, also the making Agnes infertile. I don't know. There was a lot of gratuitous in here. Somebody needed to edit this back and be like, okay, you need to pick your gothic theme and stick with it and not do all of them. I just keep thinking about other gothic books that I've read that were so much better. I mean, they weren't this type of era of gothic, but I think some other books that I've read recently, like, I just keep going back to specifically Mexican gothic and What Moves the Dead, because Mexican Gothic in particular, because Mexican Gothic had the racism themes, the family bloodline themes, and Silvia Moreno Garcia did it so well, where you felt the tension throughout the entire book. And I think maybe it's because, some of it is because Johanna Van Veen used the haunting aspect as not a scary aspect in here. That when we did get Thomas as a spirit, so here's the other spoiler part. When we got Thomas as a spirit, because Wilhelmina convinced Roose to move his body to the bog so that he could come back as a spirit, because Wilhelmina was like obsessed with him. And Roose thought it would please Agnes, so she did it. He comes back and he just like lurks outside the house. And we don't see him actually like harm anything. We get a threat that he'll possess Roose and use her body to cause harm to Agnes, but there's no actual like feeling of tension with that, even though they're trapped in the house for like 33 days with like no food or access to anything like other than what's in the house. And it just feels very not, I was so bored. I was like trying not to skim, and that should have been like the peak of the action. And I was just like, why do I care about that this man is standing outside your window? He's standing outside your window and he's moving around some plaster statues. Why do I care? That's pretty much where I was at. So do with that what you will. And luckily the other books I read this month are really good, so I'm gonna try and get you out some other reviews on things. And I have gotten, my fieldwork is done, so I'm hoping to get more on top of actually talking to you about books. And I'm working on my rhythm with reading so that I can actually like sit here and talk to you about books, because last month did not work for me. I think month-long readathons are not really a thing that I enjoy, because I felt like I did not have enough control over what I wanted to read, because yeah, I'll go make a TBR, and do I ever stick to it? If you've been here for the last 6 months, you know I don't stick to TBRs very well at all. So having to actually find books that fit specific categories and were over a certain page length, I really struggled, because I just really wanted to like sit down and read some like short novellas just to kick myself back up, but I was so worried about not finishing the readathon that I just read books I didn't like. So I did not do well about talking to you about things. So I'm going to talk to you about some things this month, and I'm going to try to keep better about it. So I hope you enjoy this. I hope you got something out of this. If you read this book and you also felt this way, please let me know, because I'm genuinely curious. And if you made it this far with me, drop me a spider web emoji.